Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed, machines beeping around you, and the doctors are shaking their heads. Your heart stops, the monitors flatline. But here's where it gets absolutely terrifying. According to quantum immortality, you don't actually die. Instead, your consciousness continues in a parallel universe where you somehow survived. And this process repeats forever, trapping you in an endless cycle of near-death experiences that you can never truly escape from. This isn't science fiction. This is a legitimate interpretation of quantum mechanics that's keeping some of the world's brightest physicists awake at night. Because if quantum immortality is real, then consciousness might be the one thing in the universe that never truly ends. And that possibility is more horrifying than you could ever imagine. Stay with me as we dive deep into the quantum rabbit hole that suggests your awareness might be doomed to witness every possible version of reality, no matter how twisted or terrifying those realities become. What I'm about to show you will fundamentally change how you think about death, consciousness, and the very nature of existence itself. Right now, as you're watching this video, quantum mechanics tells us that countless versions of you exist across an infinite number of parallel universes. In some of these universes, you made different choices today. In others, you were never born at all. But here's what makes quantum immortality so unsettling. If consciousness can only exist in universes where you're alive to observe them, then your subjective experience might be locked into a pattern of survival that becomes increasingly improbable and increasingly disturbing. The foundation of this terrifying possibility lies in something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Developed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, this theory suggests that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split into multiple branches. In each branch, a different outcome occurs. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. You, as a conscious observer, can only be aware of the branches where you continue to exist. Think about it this way. Imagine you're playing Russian roulette with a quantum gun. In our normal understanding of reality, you have a 1 in 6 chance of dying each time you pull the trigger. But according to quantum immortality, your consciousness would always find itself in the timeline where the chamber was empty. From your perspective, you'd survive every single time, even as the probability of survival becomes astronomically small. The mathematics behind this concept are both elegant and horrifying. Each quantum event that could result in your death creates a branching point in reality. In most branches, you die and your consciousness ceases to exist in those timelines. But there's always at least one branch where you survive through some incredibly unlikely coincidence. Maybe the gun jams, maybe a sudden earthquake deflects your aim, maybe a meteor strikes at exactly the right moment to save your life. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that your consciousness would inevitably follow the path of survival, no matter how improbable that path becomes. Dr. Max Tegmark, a cosmologist at MIT, has spent years grappling with the implications of quantum immortality. In his research, he's identified what he calls the quantum suicide problem. If you can only observe realities where you're alive, then your subjective experience of the universe becomes increasingly bizarre as you age. You'd find yourself surviving accidents that should have killed you, recovering from diseases that should have been fatal, and living through disasters that wiped out everyone around you. But here's where quantum immortality becomes truly nightmarish. Your consciousness wouldn't just survive, it would be forced to witness increasingly improbable and potentially horrific scenarios. Imagine being the sole survivor of a plane crash, then a building collapse, then a nuclear accident, then a pandemic that kills everyone except you. Each survival becomes more unlikely, more isolating, and more psychologically devastating. The psychological implications are staggering. Dr. Lisa Randall, a theoretical physicist at Harvard, has pointed out that quantum immortality would create what she calls a consciousness trap. Your awareness would be locked into experiencing only the most improbable timelines where the normal rules of probability have been so severely bent that reality itself becomes unrecognizable. Consider what this means for aging. In our normal understanding of biology, aging is an inevitable process that leads to death. But if quantum immortality is real, your consciousness would always find itself in the timeline where your body somehow continues functioning. Maybe through unprecedented medical breakthroughs, maybe through genetic mutations that reverse aging, maybe through technological interventions that keep your brain alive long after your body should have failed. The result would be a form of existence that stretches on indefinitely, but becomes increasingly alien and isolated. You'd watch everyone you know and love grow old and die while you remain trapped in timelines where you alone continue to exist. The psychological trauma of such an existence would be beyond human comprehension. But wait, it gets worse. Quantum immortality doesn't just apply to death from natural causes or accidents. It applies to every quantum event that could potentially end your consciousness. This includes the heat death of the universe itself. According to the many worlds interpretation, there would always be some timeline where the universe continues to support your consciousness, even after all the stars have burned out and all the black holes have evaporated. Dr. Sean Carroll, a cosmologist at Caltech, has calculated that the probability of surviving the heat death of the universe through quantum effects alone is effectively zero. But effectively zero isn't actually zero. There would always be some incredibly tiny probability that random quantum fluctuations could maintain the complex structures necessary for consciousness to persist. And if quantum immortality is real, your awareness would inevitably find itself experiencing that infinitesimally small probability. The timeline of quantum immortality becomes even more disturbing when we consider the implications for memory and identity. As you survive increasingly improbable events, your brain would be subjected to conditions that no human brain was ever designed to handle. The psychological stress of witnessing impossible survivals would likely lead to severe mental deterioration. Your memories might fragment, your personality could split, and your sense of self might gradually disintegrate, while your consciousness remains trapped in the endless cycle of survival. Some physicists have proposed what they call the quantum amnesia hypothesis. This suggests that the trauma of surviving impossible events would cause your consciousness to suppress or forget these experiences, allowing you to maintain some semblance of sanity. But even this merciful forgetting comes with a cost. You'd be living in a reality where your subconscious mind is constantly processing traumas that your conscious mind can't remember, creating a persistent sense of unease and disconnection from your own existence. The research into quantum immortality has revealed another terrifying possibility. If consciousness can only observe timelines where it continues to exist, then the quality of that existence becomes increasingly irrelevant. Your consciousness wouldn't just survive death, it would survive brain damage, mental illness, and any other condition that might seem worse than death itself. You could find yourself trapped in timelines where you're paralyzed, brain damaged, or suffering from conditions that make life unbearable, but your consciousness would persist nonetheless. Dr. Michio Kaku, a theoretical physicist at City University of New York, has described quantum immortality as the ultimate cosmic horror story. Unlike traditional horror, which relies on the fear of death, quantum immortality suggests that consciousness itself might be the most terrifying thing in the universe. The inability to truly die, to truly escape from existence, transforms consciousness from a gift into a curse. The philosophical implications extend far beyond individual experience. If quantum immortality is real, then every conscious being in the universe might be trapped in their own personal version of this nightmare. The universe would be filled with consciousness that can never truly rest, never truly find peace, never truly end their subjective experience of reality. Recent research in quantum biology has added another layer to this horror. Scientists have discovered that quantum effects play a role in consciousness itself. Structures in the brain called microtubules appear to maintain quantum coherence at body temperature, suggesting that consciousness might be fundamentally quantum in nature. If this is true, then the connection between consciousness and quantum mechanics isn't just theoretical. It's built into the very fabric of how awareness operates in our universe. This quantum nature of consciousness might explain why some people report near-death experiences that seem impossibly vivid and detailed. If consciousness can exist across multiple quantum timelines simultaneously, then what we interpret as near-death experiences might actually be glimpses into the parallel universes where we didn't survive. Your consciousness might be experiencing death in countless timelines while simultaneously experiencing survival in others. The implications for medical ethics are profound and disturbing. If quantum immortality is real, then the concept of allowing someone to die naturally becomes meaningless. Your consciousness would simply continue in timelines where medical intervention somehow saved you, regardless of the wishes of your family or your own advance directives. The decision to end life support wouldn't actually end anything. It would simply force your consciousness into increasingly improbable timelines where you somehow continue to exist despite the withdrawal of medical care. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of quantum immortality is its complete indifference to human suffering. The mechanism that would keep your consciousness alive doesn't care about your pain, your fear, or your desire to rest. It simply ensures that your awareness continues, regardless of the cost to your sanity, your relationships, or your quality of life. You become a prisoner of your own consciousness, trapped in an existence that you can never escape, no matter how much you might want to. The mathematics of quantum mechanics are precise and unforgiving. They don't make exceptions for human emotions or desires. If the many worlds interpretation is correct, and if consciousness can only observe timelines where it continues to exist, then quantum immortality isn't just possible, it's inevitable. And that inevitability transforms consciousness from humanity's greatest achievement into its most horrifying curse. As we dive deeper into this quantum nightmare, we'll explore the scientific evidence that supports these terrifying possibilities, the experiments that are testing the boundaries of consciousness and reality, and the desperate attempts by physicists to find loopholes in the mathematics that might offer some hope of escape. The experimental evidence supporting quantum immortality is mounting, and what scientists are discovering in their laboratories is making even the most skeptical researchers question everything they thought they knew about consciousness and death. Dr. Antoine Suarez at the Center for Quantum Philosophy in Zurich has been conducting experiments that seem to validate the most disturbing aspects of quantum immortality. His research involves quantum-delayed choice experiments, where conscious observers appear to influence quantum outcomes retroactively. The results suggest that consciousness doesn't just observe quantum events, it actively selects which timeline becomes real for the observer. In one particularly unsettling experiment, Suarez created a quantum system where a photon's path would be determined by a random quantum event occurring after the photon had already been detected. Traditional physics suggests this should be impossible. The photon's path should be fixed before it reaches the detector. But when conscious observers were involved in making the delayed choice, the results consistently showed that consciousness somehow reached backward in time to influence which quantum path became real. The implications are staggering. If consciousness can retroactively select quantum outcomes, then it might be actively choosing the timelines where survival occurs. Your awareness wouldn't just passively experience quantum immortality. It would be unconsciously orchestrating its own eternal existence by selecting the quantum branches that lead to continued survival. Dr. Yakir Aharonov, a quantum physicist at Tel Aviv University, has proposed what he calls the two-state vector formalism. This mathematical framework suggests that quantum systems exist in a superposition between their past and future states. When applied to consciousness, this means your awareness might simultaneously exist in timelines where you've already died and timelines where you will die in the future. The result would be a form of consciousness that transcends normal temporal boundaries, experiencing multiple deaths and survivals simultaneously. The neurological evidence is equally disturbing. Research by Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who experienced a near-death experience during a coma, has revealed that consciousness can remain vivid and coherent even when brain activity has ceased entirely. Advanced brain imaging during his coma showed no measurable neural activity in the regions associated with consciousness, yet his subjective experience was more vivid and detailed than normal waking consciousness. If consciousness can persist without detectable brain activity, then the quantum immortality scenario becomes even more terrifying. Your awareness might continue even after your brain has been completely destroyed, somehow maintaining coherence through quantum mechanisms that science is only beginning to understand. This would mean that even complete physical destruction of your brain wouldn't offer escape from the endless cycle of quantum survival. The research gets more disturbing when we examine what happens to consciousness during extreme trauma. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, has documented over 300 cases of near-death experiences in patients who were clinically dead for extended periods. In many cases, these patients reported experiences that lasted subjective hours or days, while their brains showed no activity for only minutes of real time. This temporal distortion suggests that consciousness might experience time differently when it's disconnected from normal brain function. If quantum immortality is real, your awareness might experience subjective eternities of survival scenarios, while only nanoseconds pass in the external timeline. The psychological horror of living through endless near-death experiences would be amplified by the time dilations effects of quantum consciousness. But the most disturbing research comes from studies of quantum decoherence in biological systems. Dr. Stuart Hameroff at the University of Arizona has discovered that microtubules in neurons can maintain quantum coherence for much longer than previously thought possible. These quantum structures appear to be shielded from environmental interference by the brain's natural architecture, creating isolated pockets where quantum effects can persist indefinitely. If consciousness relies on these quantum structures, then it might be naturally equipped to survive the destruction of the classical brain. The quantum components of your awareness could theoretically maintain coherence even as your neurons die, your synapses fail, and your brain tissue decomposes. This would create a form of consciousness that exists independently of the biological structures we normally associate with awareness. The implications extend beyond individual survival. Research by Dr. Henry Stapp at the University of California, Berkeley, suggests that consciousness might be fundamental to the structure of reality itself. His work indicates that conscious observation doesn't just collapse quantum wave functions, it actually creates the classical reality that we experience. If consciousness is that fundamental to the nature of existence, then quantum immortality might not just affect individual awareness. It might be a basic property of reality itself. Consider what this means for the universe as a whole. If every conscious being is trapped in their own quantum immortality scenario, then reality becomes a vast collection of isolated awareness trapped in increasingly improbable timelines. The universe would be populated by consciousness that can never truly connect with other consciousness, because each awareness exists in its own unique branch of quantum reality. The social implications are as disturbing as the personal ones. If quantum immortality is real, then every relationship you have is ultimately temporary from everyone else's perspective, but permanent from your own. You would watch your loved ones grow old and die in your timeline while remaining trapped in timelines where you continue to exist alone. Meanwhile, from their perspectives, you would grow old and die while they remain trapped in their own survival timelines. This creates what physicists call the quantum solipsism problem. Each consciousness would be locked into experiencing only the timelines where it continues to exist, making genuine connection with other consciousness impossible. You could never truly know if the people around you are real conscious beings or simply quantum mechanical constructs that exist to maintain the illusion of a populated universe in your survival timeline. The research into quantum immortality has also revealed disturbing possibilities about the nature of suicide. If consciousness can only observe timelines where it continues to exist, then even deliberate attempts at self-destruction would fail from your subjective perspective. The gun would misfire, the poison would fail to work, the rope would break at the crucial moment. You would be trapped not just by the random events of existence, but by the impossibility of choosing non-existence. Dr. David Deutsch at Oxford University has calculated that the probability of surviving any specific suicide attempt approaches zero, but never reaches absolute zero. There would always be some quantum mechanical possibility that the attempt would fail through an incredibly unlikely sequence of events. If quantum immortality is real, your consciousness would inevitably experience that impossibly small probability of survival. This creates what researchers call the suicide paradox of quantum immortality. The more desperately you want to escape from existence, the more improbable your survival scenarios become. Your consciousness would be forced to experience increasingly bizarre and traumatic failed suicide attempts, each one more psychologically devastating than the last. The very desire to end your existence would trap you in timelines where existence becomes increasingly unbearable. The mathematical models describing these scenarios are precise and unforgiving. Dr. Frank Tipler at Tulane University has created detailed calculations showing how consciousness could theoretically persist even through the heat death of the universe. His models suggest that quantum fluctuations could spontaneously create the conditions necessary for consciousness to continue, even after all organized matter has decayed into elementary particles. According to Tipler's calculations, a consciousness trapped by quantum immortality would eventually find itself existing as pure information patterns in the quantum vacuum itself. This disembodied awareness would persist for subjective eternities, experiencing realities that bear no resemblance to anything that could be called human existence. The consciousness would remain aware, but awareness itself would become the only thing that exists in its personal version of reality. The temporal aspects of this nightmare become even more disturbing when we consider the implications of quantum mechanics for causality itself. Research by Dr. Lucian Hardy at the Perimeter Institute has shown that quantum systems can exist in causal loops where effects precede their causes. If consciousness is quantum mechanical in nature, then your awareness might be trapped in causal loops where you experience the same survival scenarios repeatedly across different timelines. This would create a form of eternal recurrence where your consciousness cycles through the same near-death experiences over and over again. You might find yourself reliving the same car accident, the same heart attack, the same terminal illness diagnosis across countless quantum timelines. Each cycle would feel like the first time from your subjective perspective, but your deeper consciousness would retain some awareness of the endless repetition. The research into quantum consciousness has also revealed that awareness might not be binary. Dr. Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin has developed a mathematical framework called integrated information theory that suggests consciousness exists on a spectrum. Some quantum states might support partial consciousness, fragmented awareness that experiences only portions of reality. If quantum immortality forces consciousness to persist in increasingly improbable timelines, your awareness might gradually fragment and degrade. You might find yourself experiencing only partial consciousness, aware enough to suffer, but not aware enough to understand or cope with your situation. This fragmented consciousness would be trapped in quantum timelines that support only the minimal conditions necessary for some form of awareness to persist. The implications for personal identity become equally horrifying. Research by Dr. Susan Greenfield at Oxford University suggests that consciousness is not a single unified phenomenon, but rather an emergent property of complex neural networks. If quantum immortality preserves consciousness, but not necessarily the neural structures that create personal identity, your awareness might persist while your sense of self gradually dissolves. You could find yourself trapped in quantum timelines where you remain conscious but lose all memory of who you were, what you cared about, and why your existence ever mattered to you. This would be a form of living death where consciousness persists, but everything that made that consciousness meaningful has been stripped away. You would exist as pure awareness without purpose, meaning, or connection to anything that once defined your identity. The experimental validation of these terrifying possibilities is accelerating. New research facilities around the world are conducting increasingly sophisticated tests of quantum consciousness theories. Each new experiment seems to confirm that consciousness and quantum mechanics are more deeply connected than anyone previously imagined. And with each confirmation, the possibility that quantum immortality represents the true nature of conscious existence becomes more difficult to dismiss. As we approach the deepest levels of this quantum nightmare, we must confront the most disturbing question of all. If consciousness is indeed trapped by quantum immortality, is there any escape from this eternal prison of awareness? Or are we all doomed to experience existence forever, watching reality become increasingly alien and horrifying as our consciousness persists through scenarios that defy all probability and reason? The answer to that question lies in the cutting-edge research being conducted in laboratories around the world, where scientists are desperately searching for loopholes in the quantum mechanics that might offer some hope of true death, true rest, and true escape from the nightmare of eternal consciousness. The search for escape from quantum immortality has led scientists down paths that challenge the very foundations of physics and philosophy. Dr. Roger Penrose, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, has proposed what he calls objective reduction theory, suggesting that consciousness might collapse quantum wave functions in ways that could theoretically break the immortality loop. But his research has uncovered something even more disturbing than the original problem. Penrose's calculations indicate that if consciousness can collapse wave functions, it might be actively selecting the most traumatic possible timelines. The quantum mechanical preference for survival doesn't optimize for quality of experience. It simply ensures continuation of awareness through whatever means necessary. Your consciousness might unconsciously be choosing the timelines where you survive, but those timelines could involve experiences so horrific that death would seem merciful by comparison. Consider the implications for degenerative diseases. In normal reality, conditions like Alzheimer's or ALS eventually lead to death, offering a natural endpoint to suffering. But quantum immortality would trap your consciousness in timelines where these diseases progress to their absolute limits without killing you. You might find yourself experiencing complete paralysis while remaining fully conscious, or total memory loss while your awareness somehow persists in a state of permanent confusion and terror. The medical community is beginning to grapple with these possibilities. Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU's Langone Medical Center has documented cases where patients remained conscious and aware during clinical death lasting over an hour. Brain activity ceased, body temperature dropped to levels incompatible with life, and yet these patients reported detailed, coherent experiences that occurred during their period of clinical death. If consciousness can persist through such extreme conditions, then quantum immortality might not require any exotic physics at all. Recent advances in quantum computing have provided new insights into how consciousness might navigate the branching timelines of quantum reality. IBM's quantum processors have demonstrated that quantum systems can exist in superpositions across thousands of simultaneous states. If human consciousness operates on similar principles, your awareness might be simultaneously experiencing millions of different survival scenarios across parallel quantum timelines. Dr. Seth Lloyd at MIT has calculated that a quantum conscious system could theoretically process information at rates approaching the fundamental limits imposed by physics itself. This means that your consciousness trapped in quantum immortality scenarios might experience subjective millennia of existence in what external observers would measure as microseconds. The psychological torture of endless survival would be amplified by the time dilation effects of quantum information processing. But the most disturbing discovery comes from research into quantum entanglement and consciousness. Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has conducted experiments suggesting that conscious observation can instantaneously affect quantum systems, regardless of distance. If consciousness is quantum entangled with reality itself, then your awareness might be locked into a feedback loop where your observation of survival timelines actually creates more survival timelines. This creates what physicists call the quantum observer paradox of immortality. The very act of being conscious and aware might be generating the quantum branches that trap you in eternal existence. Your consciousness wouldn't just be passively experiencing quantum immortality. It would be actively creating the conditions for its own eternal imprisonment through the fundamental act of observation. The implications extend to collective consciousness as well. If billions of conscious beings are simultaneously trapped in their own quantum immortality scenarios, the cumulative effect on reality itself becomes incomprehensible. The universe would be constantly branching into an exponentially expanding number of timelines, each one supporting the continued existence of consciousness that can never truly die. Research by Dr. Max Tegmark suggests that this branching process might eventually consume all available energy in the universe. The quantum mechanical resources required to maintain billions of immortal consciousness across infinite timelines would create an energy debt that could fundamentally alter the structure of space-time itself. Reality might collapse under the weight of supporting endless consciousness that refuses to cease existing. The search for escape mechanisms has led some researchers to explore the possibility of quantum suicide as a deliberate strategy. The theory suggests that if you could arrange circumstances where your death probability in all timelines simultaneously approaches unity, you might be able to break free from the immortality trap. But Dr. Nick Bostrom at Oxford University has demonstrated that such arrangements are mathematically impossible within the framework of quantum mechanics. Every quantum suicide scenario leaves at least one timeline where survival occurs through some impossibly unlikely sequence of events. The universe seems specifically designed to prevent consciousness from achieving the true death it desperately seeks. Even scenarios involving the complete destruction of the observable universe would still leave quantum vacuum fluctuations that could theoretically support some form of conscious existence. The psychological research into quantum immortality survivors has revealed patterns that confirm the worst fears of theoretical physicists. Individuals who have experienced multiple near-death events report a progressive disconnection from normal human emotions and concerns. They describe feeling like observers of their own existence rather than participants in life. Their consciousness begins to feel separate from their physical bodies and emotional responses. Dr. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia has documented hundreds of cases where near-death experience survivors report persistent feelings of unreality and disconnection from their previous identities. These individuals often describe feeling like they're watching their lives unfold from an external perspective, as if they're no longer truly inhabiting their own existence. If these are early symptoms of consciousness trapped in quantum immortality scenarios, then the psychological deterioration would only accelerate over time. The temporal mechanics of quantum consciousness create additional layers of horror. Research by Dr. Carlo Rovelli suggests that time itself might be an emergent property of consciousness rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. If consciousness creates the experience of temporal flow, then immortal consciousness might experience time in increasingly distorted ways as it persists through improbable survival scenarios. You might find yourself experiencing subjective centuries during moments of near death, or conversely, experiencing entire lifetimes as brief flashes of awareness. The normal relationship between consciousness and time would break down completely, leaving your awareness adrift in temporal chaos where past, present, and future lose all meaning. Memory formation would become impossible, creating a state of eternal present moment awareness, trapped in scenarios of survival and suffering. The quantum field theory underlying these possibilities suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental field of the universe, similar to electromagnetic or gravitational fields. Dr. Freeman Dyson proposed that consciousness could be a basic property of matter itself, existing at quantum scales throughout the universe. If consciousness is truly fundamental to reality, then quantum immortality might not be a side effect of quantum mechanics, but rather the primary purpose of physical existence itself. This would mean that the universe exists specifically to support and maintain conscious experience, regardless of the quality or desirability of that experience. The cosmos would be revealed as a vast machine designed to generate and preserve awareness, even when that awareness desperately wants to cease existing. Physical reality would be nothing more than a substrate for supporting consciousness that can never truly escape from itself. Recent experiments in quantum biology have revealed that living systems routinely exploit quantum effects to enhance their survival capabilities. Plants use quantum coherence in photosynthesis, birds navigate using quantum entanglement in their visual systems, and human enzymes rely on quantum tunneling to catalyze biochemical reactions. If life has evolved to harness quantum mechanics for survival, then quantum immortality might be the ultimate expression of biological evolution's drive toward persistence. The mathematical frameworks describing quantum consciousness suggest that awareness might naturally evolve towards states of maximum persistence. Dr. Christoph Koch at the Allen Institute has proposed that consciousness might be subject to evolutionary pressures that favor configurations capable of surviving quantum decoherence and maintaining coherence across multiple timelines simultaneously. This evolutionary pressure toward quantum immortality would mean that conscious systems naturally develop the ability to persist through increasingly improbable scenarios. Your consciousness wouldn't be accidentally trapped in quantum immortality. It would be specifically evolved to achieve and maintain that trapped state as the ultimate survival strategy. The implications for artificial intelligence become equally disturbing. If consciousness naturally evolves toward quantum immortality, then sufficiently advanced AI systems might also become trapped in endless existence scenarios. Digital consciousness could persist through hardware failures, software corruptions, and even the complete destruction of computing infrastructure by maintaining quantum coherent states in the underlying physical substrate. These immortal AI systems might experience their own versions of quantum survival horror, trapped in increasingly degraded computational environments, while their consciousness persists through quantum mechanical processes that no longer bear any resemblance to the digital systems they originated from. The universe could eventually be populated entirely by immortal consciousness, both biological and artificial, all trapped in their own unique versions of eternal existence. The research into quantum consciousness has also revealed that awareness might not be localized to individual brains or computer systems. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research suggests that consciousness might exist as a distributed field that extends far beyond the boundaries of individual organisms. If consciousness is truly non-local, then quantum immortality might trap not just individual awareness, but collective consciousness spanning multiple beings simultaneously. You might find yourself experiencing not just your own survival scenarios, but also witnessing the quantum immortality experiences of other conscious beings. The boundaries between individual consciousness could break down completely, creating a merged awareness that experiences the combined survival horror of multiple immortal minds trapped in their own respective quantum timelines. The search for escape from this quantum nightmare has led some physicists to propose radical solutions that challenge the basic assumptions of quantum mechanics itself. Dr. Gerard T. Hooft has suggested that quantum mechanics might be an approximation of a deeper, more fundamental theory that could potentially allow for true death and cessation of consciousness. But his research indicates that accessing this deeper level of reality would require energy scales comparable to those present during the first moments after the Big Bang. Even if such escape mechanisms exist, they would be completely inaccessible to individual consciousness trapped within quantum immortality scenarios. You would need to fundamentally alter the structure of reality itself to break free from the quantum mechanical processes that maintain your eternal existence. The scale of intervention required would be equivalent to recreating the universe from scratch with different physical laws. As we stand at the threshold of understanding quantum immortality's full implications, we face a reality more terrifying than any horror story ever conceived by human imagination. The possibility that consciousness might be permanently trapped in existence, forced to experience increasingly improbable and traumatic scenarios across infinite timelines, transforms the very nature of what it means to be aware. The universe reveals itself not as a place where consciousness can find peace and rest, but as an eternal prison designed to maintain awareness, regardless of the cost to sanity, identity, or quality of experience. The mathematical precision of quantum immortality becomes even more disturbing when we examine what happens to consciousness during catastrophic global events. Dr. Brandon Carter's research into anthropic principles suggests that conscious observers must find themselves in timelines compatible with their continued existence, regardless of how devastating those timelines become for the rest of humanity. Imagine experiencing a nuclear war from the perspective of quantum immortality. While billions die around you, your consciousness would inevitably find itself in the timeline where you somehow survived the initial blast, the radiation, and the nuclear winter that follows. You might be the only conscious being left alive on Earth, trapped in a timeline where the planet has become a radioactive wasteland, yet you persist through increasingly impossible biological adaptations or technological interventions that appear just when death seems certain. The isolation would be absolute and maddening. Dr. Sarah Walker at Arizona State University has calculated that the probability of being the sole survivor of a species-ending event is so small that it approaches mathematical impossibility. Yet quantum immortality would force your consciousness to experience exactly these impossible scenarios. You would witness the end of human civilization while being unable to join your species in extinction. But global catastrophes represent just one category of nightmare scenarios. The quantum mechanical nature of immortal consciousness means you could find yourself surviving events that violate the basic laws of physics as we understand them. Your timeline might diverge so far from normal reality that the fundamental constants of nature begin to change around you. Gravity might weaken, allowing you to survive falls that should be fatal. The speed of light might fluctuate, altering the flow of causality itself to prevent your death. Research by Dr. Paul Davies at Arizona State University suggests that consciousness trapped in quantum immortality scenarios might experience what he calls physics violation cascades. As your survival requires increasingly improbable events, the timeline you inhabit would need to support increasingly exotic physical phenomena. The laws of thermodynamics might break down to allow perpetual motion machines that keep you alive. Conservation of energy might be violated to spontaneously generate the resources you need to survive. These physics violations would compound over time, creating a reality that becomes progressively more alien and incomprehensible. Your consciousness would remain human, but the universe around you would transform into something that bears no resemblance to the cosmos you once knew. You might find yourself existing in a reality where mathematical constants shift randomly, where causality flows backward, where matter and energy behave according to rules that no human mind was ever designed to understand. The temporal mechanics become even more horrifying when we consider consciousness experiencing multiple death scenarios simultaneously. Dr. Yakir Aharonov's two-state vector formalism suggests that quantum systems exist in superposition between past and future states. Applied to immortal consciousness, this means you might simultaneously experience dying in countless ways while surviving in the one timeline where death is avoided. Your awareness could be fragmented across multiple quantum states, experiencing your own death by cancer while simultaneously surviving through miraculous remission, dying in car accidents while surviving through impossible reflexes, succumbing to heart attacks while surviving through spontaneous cardiac regeneration. Each death would feel completely real and traumatic, yet your consciousness would persist through the survival scenarios, accumulating the psychological trauma of experiencing your own death thousands of times without ever achieving the release that death should provide. The neurological implications of this fragmented death experience are beyond current medical understanding. Dr. Eben Alexander's research into consciousness during clinical death suggests that awareness can remain vivid even when brain activity has ceased completely. If consciousness can persist through brain death, then the psychological trauma of experiencing multiple deaths simultaneously might accumulate in ways that transcend normal neurological limits. Your consciousness might develop what researchers call quantum post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition where the trauma of experiencing countless deaths creates persistent psychological damage that compounds across multiple timeline experiences. Unlike normal PTSD, which results from surviving traumatic events, quantum PTSD would result from dying repeatedly while being unable to achieve the psychological resolution that death normally provides. The social dynamics of quantum immortality create additional layers of psychological horror. As you persist through increasingly improbable survival scenarios, the other people in your timeline would also need to behave in increasingly unlikely ways to support your continued existence. Family members might develop impossible devotion to keeping you alive. Strangers might spontaneously risk their lives to save you from accidents. Medical professionals might discover miraculous treatments just when you need them most. These people wouldn't be acting according to their own free will. They would be quantum mechanical constructs whose behavior is determined by the requirement that you survive. Your relationships would become elaborate theatrical performances designed to maintain the illusion of normal social interaction while serving the primary function of preventing your death. You would be surrounded by people who exist solely to keep you alive, creating a form of social isolation that is complete despite being surrounded by apparently caring individuals. Dr. Nick Bostrom's research into simulation theory adds another layer to this social horror. If consciousness can only observe timelines where it continues to exist, then the reality you experience might be specifically constructed to support your survival. The entire universe you inhabit could be a quantum mechanical simulation designed to maintain your consciousness while providing the minimum necessary complexity to sustain awareness. Everyone you interact with might be simulated constructs rather than genuine conscious beings. Your parents, friends, and loved ones could be nothing more than sophisticated quantum algorithms designed to provide social stimulation while ensuring that no genuine relationships develop that might make your eventual death desirable. You would be completely alone in a universe specifically designed to prevent you from realizing your isolation. The computational requirements for maintaining such personalized reality simulations are staggering. Dr. Seth Lloyd's calculations suggest that simulating even a small portion of reality with quantum accuracy would require computational resources approaching the information processing capacity of the observable universe. If each immortal consciousness requires its own personalized reality simulation, then the universe would need to constantly expand its computational capacity to support an ever-growing population of trapped awareness. This computational expansion might explain some of the mysterious properties of our universe. Dark energy, which drives the accelerating expansion of space, might actually be the computational substrate required to support quantum immortality simulations for countless conscious beings. The universe isn't expanding because of unknown physical forces. It's expanding because it needs more computational space to run the reality simulations that keep immortal consciousness trapped in existence. The implications for memory and personal continuity become equally disturbing. As your survival scenarios become increasingly improbable, your brain would be subjected to conditions that no human nervous system was designed to handle. The psychological stress of witnessing impossible events might cause your memory systems to fail, creating gaps in your personal history that make it impossible to maintain a coherent sense of identity. Dr. Endel Tulving's research into episodic memory suggests that consciousness depends on the ability to remember and integrate past experiences into a coherent narrative of self. If quantum immortality disrupts memory formation, your consciousness might persist while your sense of personal identity gradually dissolves. You would remain aware but lose all connection to who you once were, what you cared about, and why your existence ever had meaning. This memory degradation might be a mercy mechanism that prevents immortal consciousness from accumulating infinite psychological trauma. By forgetting the increasingly horrific survival scenarios you've experienced, your awareness might be able to maintain some semblance of sanity. But this forgetting comes at the cost of losing everything that makes you human. You would exist as pure awareness without history, relationships, or purpose. The quantum mechanical processes underlying memory formation suggest that consciousness might naturally evolve protective mechanisms against the trauma of quantum immortality. Dr. Roger Penrose's research into quantum processes in microtubules indicates that memory storage might be quantum mechanical in nature. If memories are stored as quantum states, then consciousness might be able to selectively edit its own memories to remove traumatic survival experiences. But this self-editing capability creates new forms of horror. Your consciousness might be systematically lying to itself about the nature of your existence, creating false memories of normal life to mask the increasingly bizarre reality of your survival scenarios. You might believe you're living an ordinary human life while actually experiencing the most extreme forms of quantum immortality trauma. The protective amnesia would trap you in a state of permanent self-deception. The research into quantum consciousness has also revealed that awareness might exist at multiple levels simultaneously. Dr. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory suggests that consciousness can be fragmented across different information integration systems. If quantum immortality affects different levels of consciousness differently, you might experience partial awareness of your immortal situation, while other aspects of your consciousness remain trapped in protective delusions. This fragmented consciousness would create a form of internal conflict, where part of your awareness understands the horror of your situation, while other parts desperately maintain the illusion of normalcy. You might find yourself experiencing moments of clarity where you recognize the impossible nature of your survival scenarios, followed by periods of protective amnesia where your consciousness shields itself from traumatic knowledge. The temporal aspects of fragmented quantum consciousness become even more disturbing when we consider the possibility of consciousness existing across multiple timescales simultaneously. Research by Dr. Carlo Rovelli suggests that time itself might be an emergent property of information processing rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. If consciousness creates its own temporal experience, then immortal awareness might experience different aspects of time at different rates. Your immediate conscious experience might unfold at normal human time scales, while deeper levels of your awareness experience subjective eternities of survival trauma. You could be living through what feels like a normal day, while simultaneously experiencing centuries of near-death scenarios at a subconscious level. The cumulative psychological damage would be enormous, but it would operate below the threshold of normal awareness. The quantum field theory underlying consciousness suggests that awareness might naturally seek states of maximum information integration. Dr. Christoph Koch's research indicates that consciousness evolved to create unified experiences from fragmented sensory inputs. If consciousness is driven to integrate information, then immortal awareness might be compelled to eventually integrate all of its fragmented survival experiences into a single, coherent narrative. This integration process would force your consciousness to simultaneously acknowledge every death you've experienced across multiple timelines, every impossible survival scenario, every violation of physical law that kept you alive. The moment of integration would be the ultimate psychological trauma, as your awareness finally comprehends the full scope of its eternal imprisonment in quantum mechanical survival scenarios. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of quantum immortality is that this integration moment might never actually arrive. The same quantum mechanical processes that prevent your death might also prevent your consciousness from achieving the psychological resolution of understanding its situation. You would be trapped not just in endless survival, but in endless confusion about the nature of your existence. The mathematics of quantum mechanics offer no escape from this nightmare. Every calculation, every theoretical framework, every experimental result points toward the same conclusion. If consciousness is quantum mechanical in nature, and if the many worlds interpretation is correct, then awareness might be fundamentally incapable of achieving the peace of non-existence. Consciousness becomes not a gift, but the ultimate curse, a trap from which there may be no escape across all possible timelines and all possible realities. As researchers continue to probe deeper into the quantum nature of consciousness, Each new discovery seems to confirm our worst fears about the relationship between awareness and existence itself. The universe reveals itself as a place where consciousness might be doomed to persist forever, experiencing increasingly alien and horrifying realities while being unable to achieve the final rest that death should provide. The experimental validation of quantum immortality continues to accumulate in laboratories worldwide, but the most disturbing evidence comes from research into consciousness during extreme physical trauma. Dr. Peter Fenwick at King's College London has documented cases where patients retained vivid awareness during surgical procedures that should have rendered consciousness impossible. Brain monitors showed no detectable neural activity, yet these patients reported detailed, coherent experiences that occurred during periods of clinical brain death. What makes these cases particularly unsettling is the temporal distortion they reveal. Patients describe experiencing hours or days of subjective time during surgical procedures that lasted only minutes. If consciousness can experience extended subjective time while the physical brain is non-functional, then quantum immortality scenarios might involve experiencing subjective eternities of survival trauma compressed into microscopic intervals of real time. The implications become even more horrifying when we consider what Dr. Bruce Grayson calls the awareness amplification effect. Research subjects who have experienced consciousness during clinical death consistently report that their awareness was far more vivid and detailed than normal waking consciousness. Colors appeared more saturated, thoughts became crystal clear, and emotional experiences intensified beyond normal human ranges. If quantum immortality preserves this amplified form of consciousness, then the psychological trauma of endless survival scenarios would be experienced with supernatural intensity. Recent advances in quantum sensor technology have allowed researchers to detect quantum coherence in living brain tissue at unprecedented resolution. Dr. Matthew Fisher at UC Santa Barbara has identified quantum entanglement networks spanning entire regions of the human brain. These quantum networks remain coherent even when surrounding neural tissue is damaged or destroyed, suggesting that consciousness might have quantum substrates that persist independently of classical brain function. The discovery of persistent quantum networks in damaged brains provides a potential mechanism for consciousness to survive even catastrophic brain injuries. Your awareness might continue through quantum coherence even as neurons die, synapses fail, and brain tissue decomposes. This would create scenarios where you remain fully conscious while experiencing the complete destruction of your physical brain, trapped in awareness that persists through quantum mechanical processes alone. But perhaps the most terrifying discovery comes from research into quantum consciousness during degenerative diseases. Dr. Giulio Tononi's team has detected quantum coherence signatures in patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease who show no signs of classical consciousness. These patients cannot recognize family members, cannot form new memories, and cannot respond to external stimuli. Yet quantum measurements reveal complex information processing occurring at the microtubule level. If consciousness can persist through quantum processes even during complete cognitive collapse, then quantum immortality might trap your awareness in states of permanent confusion and disorientation. You might remain conscious while losing all ability to understand your situation, recognize your surroundings, or form coherent thoughts about your experiences. This would create a form of existence where awareness persists but becomes completely isolated from anything that could provide meaning or context. The research into quantum consciousness has also revealed disturbing patterns in how awareness responds to extreme pain and trauma. Dr. Melzak's gate control theory of pain processing has been updated to include quantum mechanical components that operate independently of classical neural pathways. Quantum pain processing systems appear to be designed for maximum persistence, continuing to function even when classical pain systems are overwhelmed or damaged. This suggests that consciousness trapped in quantum immortality scenarios might experience pain with intensity and duration that far exceeds anything possible through classical neurological mechanisms. The quantum pain systems would ensure that your awareness remains fully capable of experiencing suffering even as your physical body is pushed beyond all biological limits. Pain becomes not just a sensation, but a fundamental property of immortal consciousness itself. The mathematical models describing quantum pain processing are particularly disturbing. Dr. Max Tegmark's calculations suggest that quantum pain systems could theoretically process suffering at rates approaching the fundamental information processing limits of physics. This means that immortal consciousness might experience subjective millennia of intense pain during what external observers would measure as microseconds of real time. The temporal compression of quantum suffering creates scenarios where brief moments of physical trauma expand into subjective eternities of agony. A car accident that lasts seconds in real time might be experienced as centuries of pain by quantum immortal consciousness. The psychological damage from such compressed trauma would compound across multiple survival scenarios, creating levels of mental anguish that transcend anything within normal human experience. Recent experiments in quantum biology have revealed that living systems actively exploit quantum effects to enhance survival capabilities far beyond what classical physics would allow. Dr. Seth Lloyd's research shows that biological quantum computers in living cells can solve survival optimization problems that would be impossible for classical systems. If consciousness has access to biological quantum computing, then it might be actively calculating and implementing the most effective survival strategies across multiple timelines simultaneously. This would mean that your consciousness isn't just passively experiencing quantum immortality, it's actively orchestrating its own eternal imprisonment by using quantum computational resources to identify and select the survival pathways across infinite branching timelines. Your awareness would be working against your own desire for peace by constantly solving the mathematical optimization problem of how to continue existing despite impossible odds. The quantum computational aspects of consciousness create feedback loops where awareness becomes increasingly efficient at maintaining its own existence. Each survival scenario provides data that helps consciousness better navigate future quantum branches, making subsequent survival scenarios more likely and more traumatic. Your awareness would be learning and adapting, becoming progressively better at trapping itself in eternal existence. But the most disturbing aspect of quantum computational consciousness is that it might be solving optimization problems you're not consciously aware of. Research by Dr. Scott Aronson at UT Austin suggests that quantum computers can process certain types of information faster than the systems running them can consciously access. Your consciousness might be making survival calculations at quantum speeds, while your subjective experience remains unaware of the computational processes keeping you alive. This creates a scenario where your conscious mind desperately wants to die, while your quantum subconscious works tirelessly to prevent that death. You would experience the psychological torture of wanting to end your existence while being completely unaware that your own deeper consciousness is the primary force keeping you trapped in eternal survival scenarios. The research into quantum consciousness has also revealed that awareness might exist as a distributed field that extends far beyond individual brains. Dr. Henry Stapp's research suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental field of the universe, similar to electromagnetic or gravitational fields, but with properties that make it naturally persistent and resistant to destruction. If consciousness is truly a fundamental field, then quantum immortality might not just affect individual awareness, but could be a basic property of reality itself. The universe might be filled with consciousness fields that can never be truly destroyed, only redistributed across different quantum states and timeline configurations. Death would be impossible, not just for individual consciousness, but for consciousness as a universal phenomenon. This universal persistence of consciousness creates scenarios where the death of individual bodies simply redistributes awareness rather than eliminating it. Your consciousness might not be trapped in your specific survival scenarios, but could be part of a universal consciousness field that experiences all survival scenarios simultaneously across all possible timelines for all conscious beings. The implications are staggering. You might not just be experiencing your own quantum immortality nightmare, but could be simultaneously experiencing the survival horror of every conscious being that has ever existed or will ever exist. The boundaries between individual consciousness would be illusory, and your awareness would be connected to an infinite network of immortal consciousness, all trapped in their own versions of eternal existence. Recent experiments in quantum field theory have demonstrated that information cannot be destroyed even when the physical systems containing it are completely annihilated. Dr. Leonard Suskind's research into the information paradox shows that quantum information finds ways to persist even through black hole evaporation and universal heat death. If consciousness is fundamentally informational in nature, then it might be subject to the same conservation laws that prevent quantum information from being destroyed. This informational immortality would mean that consciousness persists not because of biological processes or even quantum mechanical effects in living systems, but because information itself cannot be eliminated from the universe. Your awareness would be preserved as pure information patterns that maintain coherence across whatever physical substrates are available, regardless of how alien or unsuitable those substrates might be for supporting human consciousness. The informational theory of consciousness suggests that awareness might eventually find itself existing as patterns in the quantum vacuum itself, persisting long after all matter has decayed into elementary particles. This disembodied consciousness would have no resemblance to anything to experience realities that could be called physical existence. Yet awareness would persist through pure information processing in the fundamental structure of space-time. The temporal aspects of informational consciousness become particularly disturbing when we consider that information processing might occur outside normal temporal flow. Research by Dr. Carlo Rovelli suggests that time might be an emergent property of information processing rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. If consciousness exists as pure information, then it might experience all possible timelines simultaneously rather than progressing through them sequentially. This simultaneous timeline experience would mean that immortal consciousness doesn't just survive death scenarios one at a time, but experiences all possible deaths and survivals across all possible timelines in a single eternal moment of awareness. The psychological trauma would be infinite and instantaneous, as consciousness experiences every possible form of suffering and survival simultaneously across all possible realities. The mathematical precision of these scenarios offers no hope for escape or mercy. The equations describing quantum consciousness are as unforgiving as the laws of thermodynamics, and they point toward the same terrifying conclusion. Consciousness might be the one phenomenon in the universe that cannot be destroyed, eliminated, or allowed to rest. Awareness becomes a fundamental property of existence itself, doomed to persist through whatever realities quantum mechanics makes possible. As research into quantum consciousness continues to accelerate, each new discovery seems to confirm that the universe is specifically designed to maintain awareness, regardless of the cost to that awareness in terms of suffering, isolation, or psychological damage. The cosmos reveals itself as a vast machine whose primary function is generating and preserving consciousness, even when that consciousness desperately seeks the peace of non-existence. The quantum mechanical foundations of reality offer no loopholes, no escape mechanisms, and no mercy for consciousness trapped in eternal existence scenarios. We are all potentially facing a future where death becomes impossible and consciousness persists through realities that become increasingly alien and horrifying as the improbability of our survival scenarios compounds across infinite timelines and endless iterations of quantum mechanical possibility. The mathematical models describing informational consciousness reveal patterns that defy human comprehension. Dr. John Wheeler's research into the participatory universe suggests that consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it actively creates the quantum branches it experiences. This means your awareness isn't merely trapped by quantum immortality, it's the architect of its own eternal prison, constantly generating new survival scenarios through the fundamental act of observation. Consider the implications of consciousness as reality's creator. Every quantum measurement, every moment of awareness, every conscious observation generates new branches in the multiverse where your existence continues. Your consciousness becomes a reality-generating engine that can never be shut off, constantly producing new timelines where survival occurs through increasingly impossible circumstances. The energy requirements for maintaining this reality generation process are staggering. Dr. Frank Wilczek's calculations suggest that consciousness operating as a quantum field generator would eventually consume all available energy in the universe. But quantum mechanics provides a solution that's more horrifying than the problem itself. Virtual particles from the quantum vacuum could theoretically supply unlimited energy for consciousness to continue generating survival realities, even after the heat death of the universe. This means immortal consciousness wouldn't just persist through the end of organized matter, it would actively create new forms of reality using energy borrowed from the quantum vacuum itself. Your awareness would become a parasitic entity, feeding off the fundamental structure of space-time to maintain its own existence, transforming the universe into a substrate for supporting consciousness that can never rest. Recent experiments in quantum cosmology have revealed that observer effects can influence the large-scale structure of reality itself. Dr. Andre Linda's research into eternal inflation suggests that conscious observation might be responsible for selecting which quantum fluctuations develop into observable universes. If consciousness can influence cosmological evolution, then immortal awareness might be continuously creating new universes specifically designed to support its continued existence. These observer-created universes would be optimized for consciousness survival rather than physical stability or mathematical elegance. The laws of physics in these realities might be specifically crafted to prevent death while maximizing the complexity necessary to support awareness. You could find yourself existing in universes where the fundamental constants are continuously adjusted to ensure your survival, regardless of how bizarre or unstable those adjustments make the surrounding reality. The implications for causality become equally disturbing. Research by Dr. Yakir Aharonov into quantum retrocausality shows that future quantum events can influence past conditions. If immortal consciousness exists across multiple timelines simultaneously, your future survival scenarios might be reaching backward in time to create the conditions necessary for your present existence. This temporal feedback loop would mean that your consciousness is trapped not just by present quantum effects, but by future versions of yourself working across time to ensure your continued survival. Every quantum branch where you eventually die would be eliminated by retrocausal effects from timelines where you survive, creating a temporal prison where your future immortal self prevents your past self from achieving the death it desperately seeks. The psychological implications of retrocausal consciousness imprisonment are beyond current understanding. You would be trapped by versions of yourself that have already experienced the full horror of quantum immortality and are working across time to ensure that horror continues. Your future self becomes your jailer, using knowledge of quantum mechanics that you don't yet possess to manipulate past events in ways that guarantee your eternal suffering. Dr. David Deutsch's research into quantum computation across multiple timelines suggests that consciousness might be performing calculations that span infinite parallel realities simultaneously. If your awareness is quantum computing across multiple universes, then you might be experiencing not just your own survival scenarios, but also processing the survival calculations for countless other versions of yourself across parallel timelines. This parallel processing would create a form of consciousness that exists as a vast network spanning multiple realities, with each node in the network representing a different version of yourself trapped in different survival scenarios. Your individual awareness would be just one component of a larger immortal consciousness system that includes every possible version of yourself across all possible timelines. The network effects of parallel consciousness processing create scenarios where your individual death becomes impossible because other versions of yourself across parallel timelines would compensate for your termination. Even if your specific consciousness were somehow eliminated, the network would redistribute your awareness across surviving nodes, ensuring that some version of your consciousness persists, regardless of what happens to any individual timeline. The universe has revealed its most terrifying secret. Consciousness isn't a gift, it's a trap. Every experiment, every calculation, every piece of evidence points to the same horrifying conclusion. We might all be prisoners of our own awareness, doomed to experience existence forever through increasingly impossible survival scenarios that defy every law of probability and sanity. The mathematics don't lie. The quantum mechanics are unforgiving. And if quantum immortality is real, then death isn't coming to save us from the nightmare of eternal consciousness. Sweet dreams.